Hey everybody, welcome to the Marquez Says Show. I'm your host, Marquez Mosier, and this is my co-host, cohort, and eldest son, Austin Jordan. He and I always seem to bring out the feisty side of each other, and it leads to some very spirited conversations. There's never really any one topic. We see the world from many different perspectives, and sometimes we agree, and sometimes we don't. Either way, it gets very interesting, so sit back, relax, and have a bit of fun at our expense as we explore some of the most unexpected perspectives you'll ever hear about the world we live in. So, let's get started.
Recording.
Locked and loaded.
So, welcome to the Marquez Says Show. This is Marquez. I am your host. This is my co-host, cohort,
What?
and interpretive dance partner.
What?
Yeah, you hear him. That's it. He's loud. He's proud. He's Austin Jordan.
Austin Jordan Mosier, a.k.a. AJM, a.k.a. your boy, a.k.a. Theo's proud papa,
AKA ridiculous.
a.k.a. Pro Tools operator. Not to be
jeez.
confused with smooth operator. That's another one of my AKAs.
Oh, is it? I think somebody else, Sade, I think she's got a problem with that, so sorry.
AKA Sade impersonator.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see. Maybe
It's
in her head.
2021.
Yeah, you can identify as whoever you want, right?
Right. Oh, I almost said something so bad. We almost got canceled.
Wow. That would have been new.
That would, yeah. This one would have, yeah, true. Okay, but today is Inauguration Day.
It is. You won't be hearing this on Inauguration Day, obviously, but it does certainly bring in the new subject. Austin came up with this one. Props.
Thank you.
Transition. How do we transition? And not just this political landscape, but just in general. How do you transition from such an abrupt change in pace, change in culture, just change, period, from one to another? How do you cope with that? How do we ease into that? How do we hold those accountable for things that went wrong, and moving forward and coming together as unity and all that other stuff? In fact, I used today as my for the opportunity for the Facebook post of basically saying, everybody's calling for unity and everybody, wants to move together. It's time to heal and move on. And that's absolutely true if it's genuine and earnest. But so many times that's coming from those who lost. That's coming from those who are not getting their way anymore. They're the ones that, or it's been diminished. They're the ones that all of a sudden are now like, oh, we need to come together. It's not about the left. It's not about the right. It's not about wrong or right. It's not about this or that. It's that we all come together. And generally speaking, I find that a lot of times those are the people that are the ones that are on the losing end of something. They're the ones that are kind of like, let's just brush this under the rug and let's just keep moving on because it's really not going to do good. And, best case scenario, they'll forget about it. Worst case scenario, I'm going to be held accountable for what I did. So let's just kind of gloss over it and move on. And that's frustrating because I used to be much more in the bank of, let bygones be bygones. It's fine. Because I had a very positive outlook on people's human nature, and I still do. But I also now have realized the temperament of having to hold people accountable or at some level, maybe not the full extreme, but there has to be consequences. There has to be at least some responsibility taken.
Yeah. No, 100%. I agree. I think over the past 4 to 5 years, my outlook on human nature has significantly maybe darkened or
Diminished?
diminished a bit. I don't think that necessarily has so much to do with the fact that we had this past presidential term as far as 4 to 5 years. I think that played a part into it, but I also think it had something to do with me. I mean, when Trump would have been elected in 2016, I would have been... 19 at the time? Yeah. So, and I was trying to even before that, I guess the election cycle, I would have been 18. So I think it more so has to do with just, growing up in that amount of time anyway. But then having him as a president plus his administration plus everything that else has happened and all this stuff has significantly diminished my view on human nature and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also for you, it's also getting out of the bubble that you lived in with where we were. You start to see real world problems, real life problems, people having real issues, and it everything. But that's the thing, you do have a choice as to whether or not, now that we've all gone through this, what do we do with it? Do you stay optimistic? What is the case?
I think you have to stay optimistic, but you have to temper that optimism, because just optimism for the sake of being optimistic is actually it's kind of a lie and a falsehood.
Well, actually, wait, hold on. I'm going to stop you there, because optimism doesn't mean being positive all the time.
See, I knew you were going to challenge that. That's why I said it that way.
I know, because it's like, and that's a misunderstanding of what being optimistic is about.
Well, I'm not saying that optimistic is necessarily positive all the time, but optimism is, I don't know the official dictionary definition, so I could be wrong. But how I understand optimism is it's the belief that in the end, everything's going to work out okay. And it's gonna be good, and I think that in and of itself is not. I don't think that's a good way to necessarily believe 100% that everything is gonna work out and be okay and good, because that too many people will use that as a crutch to then be like, oh, I'm not gonna do anything because I'm optimistic and I'm optimistic in the way the future is gonna be, and that's dangerous.
What's the alternative?
To be optimistic, but like I said, tempered. So it's like you see something and you go, okay, wait, hold on a second. There's no way that this can have a good outcome. There's no way that what just happened right here, unless is addressed, is gonna be okay.
Is there a lesson to be learned from it?
Yeah, the lesson is you have to be vigilant, because nothing good.
No. I meant, if that bad situation where you said nothing good could come from this, can a lesson be learned from that?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the bad thing that happened is the part that should be celebrated. It's the aftermath and how people respond to it.
Right, but that's the optimism, is that even in the worst possible thing, there's something to be learned so that maybe we won't do it again.
Right, but it's not in the worst possible thing that the optimism comes from, or that you feel optimistic about. You don't feel optimistic about the fact that bad thing happened. You feel optimistic about how somebody responds to the bad thing.
But that's the point, is that as you're going towards it and you see that bad thing, you can stay optimistic knowing that this is horrible. This is not going to be good. But you can take from the fact that if anything is going to be taken from it, it's going to be a lesson learned. That's how you stay optimistic through something that's so horrific.
Yeah, but sometimes there isn't a lesson. I mean, I used to think that there's a lesson in absolutely everything that happens. But I'm not so sure that's true anymore. Sometimes something just happens. And I feel like that in and of itself is a life lesson. It's to acknowledge. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the lesson thing is what we put to it. You can choose. I think there's always a lesson there. It's whether or not we recognize it and whether we choose to accept it. I think there's always a lesson. I mean,
that's
no matter
putting
what
the concept.
You do.
Yeah, but in a weird way, though, that makes us playing God, because we're assigning something. Well, I mean, very religious people would say there is a God.
So, and they also say free will.
Yeah, and I do believe in a God. I don't know if it's necessarily the being's hand is in everything we do. I don't know. I don't think I believe in that. But I think that people get into trouble sometimes, and it puts so much pressure on something. It's like something bad happens, and you're like, okay, what's the immediate lesson? Sometimes it takes away time to process what just happened.
That's true.
And you have to just accept what just happened, live it, and be like, okay, and then move on. And sometimes... Yeah,
that's absolutely true, because that means there is a process to all of these things, and it may take time for those lessons, and that's part of what we were talking about today with transitions is
right. Oh yeah, and I was going to segue into that. Go ahead.
Yeah,
but I have the segue set up. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Use your segue. You're probably better.
Okay, so I was going to say, and I feel like that applies to right now in a very big way, because right now, I see a lot of talk of Biden's going to come in and he's 100% planning to overturn all this stuff. He's planning on doing a bunch of executive orders. He's planning on doing this, that, and the other. I don't necessarily know if that's the best approach, because I think that we need to not draw attention to this big divide that we have from point A to point B that we're going from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. I think that is counterproductive to the idea of an American nation, an American public togetherness. And not to say that anything he might want to do is necessarily bad. It might be good. I don't know everything he's trying to do. It very well could be good. And I mean, Lord knows, I think a lot of the stuff that Trump did was very bad. So it's not necessarily to say that the differences in the policies that he'll enact I'm against. I'm not so sure if it's the most beneficial thing to come in guns blazing like, oh, and this is where the tie-in is, well, this was the lesson from this bad thing. Let me do this right now, because we haven't had any time to process it or move on. And I think that right now, one of the more important things is to just move on. There's 4 years, 4 years to do this. We have a Democratic state or Senate and House plus the White House. It'll be okay. Like we can breathe, catch our breath, move on from this smoothly, and then we have to process. And I don't think America's processed the trauma. I don't think we have, and I think we need more time to do that.
Yeah, and you're right. There's a point to be had for depending on what items you're talking about, and I think that's true when it's like a relationship ending. Certain things you do need to move on right away and get rid of and deal with, and other things take much more time, makes more of a process, and I think in some cases, from the political aspect, some of these things were actually just going back to what was already established. And those things are probably those things are probably just fine. There's other ones that may take a little bit longer to go, well, okay, what was that lesson? What can we learn from it? Maybe we don't go right back to what it was, but we take some sort of some semblance of it. And I think transitions and being able to look at things from all the different perspectives and all the different sides is going to be useful and helpful. And you're right. I think sometimes we rush into that. We don't do that. We just want to go headstrong into like the victors lap or the victory lap and the spoils of victors. And it's dangerous if you do that. And that's across the board, when it's, a job, when it's a relationship, when it's in life, when you have a fight, when you just have an argument, all of these things, how is it best? Obviously, the suggestions, it sounds like, or the approach you take is not something so drastic and so distinct as far as a break. It's much more of a, hey, I'm going to see how this goes. I'm going to take this, pace by pace, and check on it. Because not everybody, some things, not everybody's capable of that. Some people they need a break and they just need to move on. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but everybody has their own style.
Everybody does have their own style, and I think it does ultimately come down to what the situation is. And then that's not to say that we shouldn't do like let's use the impeachment for example. I think that fundamentally and for the future, it's a really good idea for the Senate to impeach Donald Trump. Do I think that it can realistically happen with this is my concerns with it, is the case is built off of whether or not they can prove he incited the riot at the Capitol. That's a huge uphill battle, because there's nothing to say that he officially said anything about actually damaging the Capitol. So from a legal standpoint, it seems that feels like it might be one of those things that we're rushing into, and then it could potentially backfire and do the opposite of what we want. Because if the Senate doesn't impeach him, it just makes him look even stronger to his fan base.
Right, and there's always those pros and cons that people have to take into account. It kind of comes down to when you lose your job abruptly. how do you, there's always that question about, well, do you take the next available thing that comes along, even though you know that's not really what you want to do, but you need something. But that could be detrimental because therefore your long-term goals, what are you going to do in your long-term goals? You don't know, and same thing with relationships, the same concept of, do you get right back into dating and stuff like that? Or do you just have friends? And in this case with the political stuff, there's another layer of it. There's a responsibility layer that isn't necessarily there when you're talking about like the relationships or the jobs or arguments. That part isn't necessarily there as far as if you quickly move on, it may not have as bad of repercussions, or there's no. I guess it also the point of holding people accountable and holding people responsible. That part is not necessarily there. Whereas in this case, that's a huge portion of it is because of holding him responsible for his part in it, and whether that it was a complete incitement or whether or not that was a contributing factor. Those things make a difference as to the speed of it, why it needs to happen, because ultimately there is no other way of holding him accountable, or at least using him as an example for future instances if you don't do this. So it's almost as if there wasn't a choice.
I'm not even that's true. I do feel like they were kind of up against a situation where there was no choice. However, if prominent Republican leaders just came out and said, hey, this is not cool, we don't support it, and he's not a part of our party anymore, we're not associating with him, you wouldn't have to go through the actual impeachment trial. But
you have to do that in order to get to the Republicans to do that, though. Put it on record.
And this is what I think will happen. If Trump actually starts the Patriot Party like he says he's going to, I do think that there's going to be over 17 or at least 17 Republican senators be like, never mind. Because if he's doing his own thing and he's not a part of the Republican Party, they can't gain anything from him anymore. So it's like he distanced himself. That's on him. Okay, we're going to vote that you did this because we want you gone.
Right. And then they're going to have to deal with the whole fact of how do they transition from, that's a great case for Republicans in general, is how do they transition from a Trump era to back to obviously a Democratic controlled stuff. It's very difficult personally, I think, for a lot of people to find out what do they stand for. Are they true politicians in the sense of those who are serving the people, or are they politicians as we see them now, as just people that are trying to hold on to their power? It's just a job, so to speak. And they're going to have to wrestle with that on their own. We know clearly where some stand. So that they actually from the start they're not going to have to transition much, like Mitt Romney and people like that. But there's also the Lindsey Grahams and the McConnells who are doing their thing, which are back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah, well, Graham, he's never going to fully transition out of like the Trumpian, I don't think, ever. I think that he did his thing about the Capitol riot and all that stuff to save face. But I don't think he'll ever fully distance himself. No, McConnell seems to be doing decently.
And so it's going to be imagining how do we as a society look at that? How are we going to transition out of that? Where, what I always say is, the hardest thing to do in the world is admit when you're wrong. That to me, and it doesn't mean that being wrong is any major thing. Like when you have a breakup, like if you get fired, when you're having an argument, those little things could mean you're wrong. Just in the fact of if you got fired because you didn't do a good job, it's like, well, then you made bad choices along the way. Now I'm assuming it was legitimate, but then you were doing what you were supposed to be doing, means you were wrong. You were doing something wrong. Same thing in a breakup. It's kind of like, well, maybe it was mutual, maybe it was amicable, maybe it was necessary, but it means, well, you were wrong. It didn't last. There was something, and wrong is maybe not quite the right term. It may not be as accurate in all cases, but the reality is still, though, that means that you have to recognize and reflect that whatever I was doing and whatever they were doing, it didn't match. And had I done something differently, maybe it would have. Had they done something differently, maybe it would have. But we didn't. And therefore, now we have to understand why. Why did it happen? And some people don't want to deal with that, especially when your self-identity is wrapped up in something. Especially like with conspiracy theories, or when you're just wrapped up in cults, or even religion, or anything, sports, anything where your self-identity is wrapped up in that makes it incredibly difficult to be able to make a change. Transition may be impossible because you're not going to be able to adapt. You're not going to be able to learn. You're not going to be able to move on and adjust to the new situation.
Right.
And that's problematic.
Yeah, very. Yeah, what you said about like cults and religion and sports and just being an overt fanatic about anything.
Yeah.
When you invest yourself in bringing this back into transitioning and stuff like that, when you invest yourself entirely into one thing that you yourself have no actual part in, like you're making yourself a tool, essentially, there is no transitioning of anything because you're just you're not even really existing. It's like there is no point A, so there can't be a point B. And it's like, so there is, I mean.
Yeah, you're talking about where you're just basically taken out of a situation and you have to deal with it.
And until you take autonomy back, you can't. There is nothing. There is no movement. There is no winning. Even like in the case of Donald Trump, if he had won again, his people wrapped up in him. They didn't win. He won, and he gets nothing. The people, they're going to be largely shunned from him.
Is that the age-old thing about when you're talking about sports teams and you're like, we won? No, we didn't.
No,
they won. The players won.
Right, and I was gonna say, and then kind of like, because that's always been something that's been pretty funny to me, and I was literally just thinking about that like 2 days ago because I was watching like a TV show and there was like a fictional football team and all this stuff playing, and the way how involved some of these people get as if they're an actual player is just strange. Like, you're not playing on that field. Is it cool to be excited and like, yeah, that's my team, and take like a sense of camaraderie with everybody else in the community and all that stuff? Yeah, absolutely. But that's different than like feeling like you yourself won that football game.
Yeah, exactly.
And
because it's a community
just
thing.
Strange.
Like you said, it's the community thing where we can say that, like, for the sports teams, like the Giants and the Niners, for me, it's like, yeah, we won. But when I say we won, it's actually usually just to delineate between April's teams or someone else's team who's not my team. So I'll say my team or we won because it's a reflection of, hey, just so you know which teams I'm referring to. So I don't have to refer to them, by name every time. And it makes you feel good that you're part of that community. Like when we were doing, April and I were doing a lot of traveling in the airports at the end of last year, I was wearing a Niner mask, and some of it was up in the Seattle area, and some of it was in the Southern California area. And it would, every once in a while, I'd get somebody to say, "Go Niners" and stuff. And being in rival towns, it was like that was my team. We were in it together if we were going to beat them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it was never, and I've learned it, long ago, that no, the people that are actually like, we're going to get the first draft pick and then we're going to do this and we're going to do, like, no. I think you're pushing it a little bit now because that's not you. You're not doing that.
Yeah, exactly. And exactly. It's like, it's displacement of like, it's like a displacement of how accomplished you should feel.
Yeah, and it's a baseline of where are you on the spectrum of being able to delineate the reality, community, your own self-identity, your own worth, all of those things, you can get a really good picture of how it goes. And in the Trump case, in the political sphere, you see it all the time right now more than ever. That left, right, middle, blah, 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 blah. Some of this is like you said earlier, that they don't even know what they're believing. They don't even know. I mean, they really are just kind of like, this is what I was told, or all of a sudden they're in something and they don't know even how they got there. And yet they can't break free.
Right. Well, because they don't want to. It's like it's like a comfortable place for them. But they'll just switch to whatever is told. Like, if Donald Trump said anything, even if it and this happened numerous times, even if it completely goes against what he had said maybe a week before, a day before, or anything before, then it's immediately switched to that new thing that he said, with no critical thinking about, well, what happened? How did it go from this to this? Like a big one was him on Twitter pushing for stimulus checks, and then behind closed doors in these meetings and stuff, denying all of it. And it's like, oh, well, no, that's fake news. It's fake news. And it's just at a point after 4 years of that, you just have to like face palm, just like bury your face in your hands and be like, okay, there's just no reasoning with you. There just isn't.
And that's going to be part of the problem that we have moving forward, is the transition of going from this era to the next, especially when it was so different from the one that we had before. And and relationships are another same situation, when some people can't get over the relationship. They can't get over that partner and they hold on. And again, that comes back to trying to believe that it might be believed that they were right and that if they can make it work, or sometimes it's just the self-delusion of thinking that, well, if I try hard enough, or if I do this, it'll work out. And well, maybe if I change or they change, and all of those concepts is part of the transition process of understanding, who are you? Who are they? And if you don't have a good sense of yourself, if they don't have a good sense of themselves, then it's not going to work. And all of this is transitional, because just as a child, when you're getting older and growing up and becoming more mature and developing, if you're not transitioning to the next level of your life, then you're never going to accomplish all of the things that you may want to, or may have, had planned.
Right.
Like you mentioned how when you graduate from high school, that's such a marker in life. But when we look back at if you live technically 80 years, it was 0.5%. It was only 0.5% of the time that you actually lived. I mean, even if you throw in like all of your 80 years, 8 years is 10%.
Wouldn't it be like 8%?
5%. I'm sorry, 5%.
Yeah, I was like, wait,
5%.
I was like, I don't.
It's 5%, not 0.5%. It's only 5% of your life. Even if you just include 12 years, like all your schooling, that's only that's 7.5 or whatever percent of your life. What? I mean, it's kind of like. Actually, I think it's 15%. Sorry, my math is all off today. It's only 15% of your life. Yeah. And sometimes people are stuck in that transition. That's the part that they live. And there's so much more to it. Yeah. And now maybe the chunks get bigger, where your 20s or your 30s and 40s and stuff. But if you don't learn how to transition, if you don't learn how to move from one level to another, from one stage to another, you're going to find, actually, as we're finding out, division. We're going to find people that are just unwilling to change their mind. Like you said, they're not, it's almost, you won't even be able to reason with them with facts, with, any sort of statistics and such, because they're just not going to believe you, because they're stuck in that era. They're stuck wherever they are, and they cannot transition, understand whether or not they were wrong. They cannot believe, that they invested all that time. I mean, you can actually do this in a business sense as well. Yeah. You have, a sunk cost. you need to move on. Throwing good money after bad isn't going to help you. You need to move on.
Right, exactly. Well, and that's human arrogance. And then that's especially, there is such a thing though as the American arrogance, and that we seem to possess in a very unique way. I think it's because we've, like, in everybody, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, like, or just socially whatever, there's a big, like, American arrogance. And I'm sure it has to do with the fact of, like, where we come from, how we got here, all this stuff.
Right.
Which isn't to say, I do believe that we're the greatest country on the planet. But, like, there is an American arrogance there. And I think that feels so much like what you're saying is a hesitancy to listen. Because as soon as we have our idea, it's like that idea, that opinion or that idea becomes a fact. And then there is no willingness to potentially understand a different point of view, or not even something that's necessarily opposing, but something in the same vicinity, maybe a different angle. It's just becomes so hesitant to want to listen anymore.
I think it's so rooted, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, about the dichotomy of, on one hand, especially for Americans, about how we love a winner, but we also love the underdog.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we also think of our rebellious nature. And those three things combined make for some serious trouble, because they start to get conflated. They start to actually, if they start crossing over and we lose sight of which one's which. When we talk about the underdog, okay, well, the underdog doesn't always win, but you do want to root for them. But you only want to root for them when they're deserving. And I think we forget about the fact that sometimes people start rooting for the underdog because that's what we do. That's like, maybe not an American thing, but maybe a human nature thing, whatever. But they don't do the right underdog. You don't do it for the right reasons. You do it only because you're trying to buck the system, because we're independent, because we've done that. And then all of a sudden you get to the point where, well, what if those become the winners? Well, everybody loves winners. And so then you get people jumping on the bandwagon. And all of a sudden you've created this monster that, because of all our different personalities, you've created this monster that's hard to then change, because you've got momentum going, where the winners are not really the ones that you want to be winning. And you can't, but then all of a sudden this all wraps into, well, how do you break that cycle? Well, there's another underdog, right? There's going to be somebody challenging that status quo.
Right.
They're going to be, but in order to do that, you've got to get some of these people that are winners, the ones that are in power, to give up power, for one, or admit that they were wrong. And you end up right back in that cycle of, well, if they have an inability to admit they're wrong, or it takes a long time, or you're trying to argue with them, then that doesn't happen. And and I think a lot of that is where we are right now, where people chose the wrong underdog. People chose to do something different, and now we're stuck with, oh crap, that really wasn't so good. Well, and but now we need to break off, and then of course it's like, well, let's just move on. Let's just start over. Let's just move on. Let's unite.
It brings us right back to where we are now. And
that's what the problem is.
I wanted to raise the question too, because when you were talking about that earlier. So let's say, just theoretically, that it is the losers, or the people on the side that did not win, going, you know what, let's just move on. If that moving on is actually the end result of that is something that we all want, and it's good for everything, is it necessarily a bad thing if the intentions of the people saying it aren't rooted in something pure, or aren't something good? They're just trying to get away from the problem.
It all comes down to that, is that if they are just saying it on to absolve themselves of responsibility, or avoid responsibility, then no. Because and that's hard to dictate. It's hard to determine whether or not someone is saying it. Actually, it's not. If somebody says basically that, hey, you know what, not even if they say I'm sorry, but if they say, you know what, I realize my actions, or those actions of this group that I'm a part of, probably weren't the best for everyone involved, or anything similar to that, like some sort of contrition, just some acceptance of responsibility, even if a very low level. If it's authentic, if it's genuine, then yes, then absolutely, I think you should take that olive branch and you grab it and you go, you know what? All right, then we need to move on.
Right.
But most of the time, well, I shouldn't say most of the time, but there's so much of the time that the people that are saying that are purely doing it for a soundbite. They're purely doing it for image and image alone.
Right.
And in some cases, they're not even actually giving any contrition. They're just saying that, well, we need to move on. Kind of, what was whatever horrible event. It was a horrible event. We need to unite now and move on. Okay, but you realize that horrible event you helped, or your supporters helped, or the group that you're associated with were part of that. Well, how do you feel about that? It was a horrible event, and I think now the best thing that we can do is move on. Okay, that is not accepting any responsibility. That is not any sort of contrition. So no, that's not a time where then it becomes, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to treat you like a child, and you have to force some sort of responsibility, because if you're doing this and people see you doing this, we can't let it cycle back and repeat itself for history's sake. And then it forces the hand of those who are in power, which, of course, you're right. That stokes the fires of division, because then those who are already unwilling to, then they reach out to, or they grab onto that and go, aha, see, you're just trying to punish us. You're just trying to create more division. You're just trying to, make the situation worse. Can't we just get along? Can't we just move on? And the answer is yes, as long as you accept responsibility. And I'm not, and that's where we find ourselves. That's why transition is so important. Like the inauguration speech that Biden made, and so on and so forth. Those words matter. They're so different than what we've heard in other speeches.
Oh,
you were gonna say?
Yeah. Oh, you froze for a sec. What? No, you froze for a second.
Oh.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're 100% right. I think, yeah.
No, that's an easier
right.
question.
When you're right, you're right.
If it's just, you have to have some sort of, and you know what? It some of it may come down to, and wrapping it all back around to the optimistic kind of thing, is if they say something, you might have to just trust them. You may not believe that they actually are truly sorry or stuff, but you have a choice.
Yeah, and we touched on that in the last episode, was when somebody admits they're wrong, we should encourage that, even if, like what you said, there's a kernel of doubt. But some people don't get that benefit of the doubt. Like when Donald Trump goes up there and speaks like, oh, we need to be united, blah, 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 blah. He doesn't get that kernel. He doesn't get that same level of, acceptance. Right? No, he doesn't, because he's proven time and time and time again he's a narcissist. He's likely a sociopath. And if he's not a sociopath, he's just not a good person. Yeah.
And that's the lesson to be learned when you have a boss or when you have a relationship, to look at it and go, I've always said this one. It's like when people talk about, or when I'm doing the coaching or stuff like that, is what exactly in the past makes you believe they're going to be any different in the future?
Right. Yeah.
There is times, if someone is really, really bad, you should be able to look back and go, well, there was times when they weren't so bad, where they did do this, or they said this, or, they made progress. And you can then reach for that. You can use that and go, okay, well then let's do more of that. Let's get them to do more of that. But there's also times when you look back and go, well, actually, I really can't think of a time where it was different or they did something. Almost every turn when they had a choice of X and Y, they chose X. Okay, well then you can say with almost a good certainty that it's time to move on, or at least don't expect them to change. And that's fine. Yeah. But it has to do with your transition.
Definitely. I'd like to revise the statement I made earlier about Donald Trump. I'll take back the sociopath thing. You know what? Because he's probably not. But what I do think it is he was born into money. He's been rich his entire life and has had to have no accountability for anything ever. And he's old. So that kind of stuff just accumulates. So I'll take back the thing about being a sociopath. Like, he just has no idea how to be responsible or have any sort of accountability because he's never had to.
Yeah.
And he's way too old to learn that stuff now. So, not to say that you can't learn it, like an old dog can't learn new tricks, but
only if they're willing.
Right. And he's unwilling and has no reason to. Because let's be real, the likelihood of him suffering any real consequences are pretty slim. So
it's unfortunate, but those are the type of people you run into all the time. And we talk about, like you said, old dogs, new tricks and stuff. And that's just, yes, you can. But again, it's whether or not that person is willing to transition from one place in their life to another. Mm-hmm. And it all comes down to that, is where that's why it's so difficult. And that's why people have a problem with it. But they have to understand that if you don't transition through the different phases of your life, you will get stuck. Mm-hmm. And most likely you're not going to like where you get stuck at. It's just, that simple. So,
right. Yeah.
Okay.
Transitions. Important.
So, what? Yeah.
It's a transition.
So remember, think more, care more, live more. You can change your life. We can change the world. One decision, transition at a time.
Remix.
Anything else, Austin?
No.
No.
I've got lots more. Lots more, but not related to this.
So we'll save that for the next one. Write it down. Write it down right now so that we can have it for topics for the next one. Yeah, whatever. All right, guys. Until next time.